want to talk a little bit about saxophone specifically first, because that is my primary instrument. I do play flute and clarinet, and I have them together just in case. And we can talk about some of the differences and similarities and things to do. But I'm assuming, since you're all musicians and teachers, that the kinds of things that I like to see and talk about for helping start beginners. Because in the year I taught middle school band, I can tell you, I had one cute little blonde girl who sounded great on the trumpet, and I tried to get everybody to do whatever she was doing because I knew very little about it. I only realized in retrospect that my brass class teacher was an organist, and that might have contributed to my lack of information. But that said, nobody knows everything, even about my own instrument. I don't know everything. And so it trickles down as it gets further away from my home base. But let's talk about a couple of things. Equipment, saxophone. Everybody wants to know about equipment. The thing about any instrument is the closer to the, I'm going to turn this up. Is this better? Because now I can actually hear myself too. The closer to the sound source where the vibrations are, the more impact quality has. The good news is that's where it's the cheapest: reeds, mouthpieces, ligatures. Equipment, the instruments themselves, that would come after, as far as I'm concerned. Get good quality reeds once they stop breaking them. So my recommendation in our little music ed saxophone class is maybe after the first concert at Christmas, then upgrade the quality of reeds. I have a student right now who broke 2 reeds in the same lesson. He studies with a couple of my colleagues, no, his parents are a couple of my colleagues at USC. So I took him on. He's in 7th grade, and he actually broke 2 reeds in one lesson. So when we had him order more, I had him get the cheapest reeds they could find, which is usually the orange box Rico. Now, if you have a local store that has another brand name, doesn't matter. Inexpensive until they realize how fragile the tip of the reed is. That goes for clarinet also. Once you get them to understand that, and they stop breaking them all the time, then I get them the highest quality reed that I can immediately. And that is somewhere, and I think in the reed paper that I sent you, I'll jump around back and forth between some of the things that I sent out and what I have in my notes for this. I played D'Addario reeds. They used to be Rico Reserve and then changed. They got bought by the D'Addario company, who you may know as a maker of strings for guitars and violins and things like that. But they took over the Rico company and rebranded the reeds D'Addario Reserve. They're spectacular. I go through a box of 10 about every, well, the box that I just played one out of, I opened on December 7th. Last December. So that's 5 months in. I expect to get through the summer with this group of reeds. For clarinet and saxophone reeds, they want to rotate them. Don't play the same reed every day. Play it every other day at most. And so I have a rotation of 8 reeds that I got out of the same box. That's where it's different from Van Doren, which I played for 35 years. For the Van Dorens, I would get maybe 4 reeds out of a box. For the D'Addario, I get 8 out of a box of 10. And they last just as long as the Van Dorens, sometimes longer. So that's why I'm a D'Addario artist. I actually switched, and shortly after I switched, I was sitting next to the D'Addario rep, well, then the Rico rep, at a clinic in LA. And he said, geez, we'd love to have you on board with the company. And I said, isn't that interesting? I took my reed off and showed him. I said, I just switched like a month and a half ago. And I'm a big believer. They're more playable. They're a little easier out of the box, and a lot more of them work. So that's what I do. Sorry, there's my D'Addario push for today. But I believe in it. I play the products I believe in. I don't care whether I'm getting money from the company or not. And believe me, nobody's getting money from the companies right now. It's everybody's hurting. But for me, and I can tell when I have students walk in with other brands of reeds, because it's just they're more finicky. Anyway, that said, the reeds are really important. Then mouthpieces. I gave you a paper that has mouthpieces we can talk about in more detail later, but let me get through some generic things. Neck straps. I see a lot of these Neotech neck straps that are spongy. Please, marching band only, please. Here's the problem. When you set up, You want to anchor on top of the mouthpiece, okay? And if you don't have a solid neck strap, there's no bottom. And so it's just spongy. And then the students end up being loose on the top, which makes them tight on the bottom. Okay. Now for marching band, having that little shock absorber is a really valuable thing. They get fewer bloody lips and it doesn't hurt so bad. I still remember, I can hardly remember anything from 40 some years ago, but I remember my first marching band rehearsal. I was shocked at how much pain I had in the embouchure from the horn bouncing around when I was trying to play. The Neotech neck strap can really help with that, but then have them not use it for their sit down concert band playing because they need a firm anchor. Um, that said, the other piece of equipment that I see a lot that I hate is the shove it pad saver. It's not a pad saver, it's a pad ruiner. Um, the whole point behind swabbing the saxophone or the clarinet or the flute or the bassoon or the oboe every time you play is you don't want moisture on the leather pads because leather gets hard and cracks when it gets wet and dry, wet and dry. And the shove it takes the moisture and shoves it right out against the pads and holds it there. It is the exact antithesis of what you really want. Okay. I wish whoever invented that would seriously just shove it. I'm not a fan of that particular piece of equipment. Please, please, when I see it in a student, and the other thing that those things do is they leave a lot of lint on the tone holes. And I've had students with major leaks, and all we do is we clean out all the lint that built up from their shove it days, and then everything's better again. So there are two things about that particular piece of equipment that I don't like. I see every now and then people shoving towels or Nerf balls down the bell of the saxophones, and I had 13 alto saxophones in my middle school band, and I think one or two tenors. I know about loud noises, um, but if you shove something down the bell, it hides from the problem that exists in their embouchure. They have an embouchure problem. It's easy to fix. Tell them to pull more lower lip in or take a little less mouthpiece, and you'll fix the problem. Then they can blow for all they're worth and keep the control that you want to hear. Putting that thing in the bell allows them to continue to have a lousy embouchure, and you just don't hear it as much. So you have less trouble, but they actually have more. So it's better if you solve the problem or help them solve the problem, which is too much mouthpiece. Saxophone, and most young students, when they get into a large group like your band, they want to be able to hear themselves to make sure they're doing what they should be doing. And so they try to play louder than the whole rest of the band combined. And on saxophone, you can darn near do that. Flute, not possible. Clarinet, yeah, no. Maybe trumpet, maybe trombone, saxophone for sure. And loud, uncontrolled saxophone tone, as you all know, is just toxic. But it's easy to fix. It took me a long time to boil it down to the simplest essence, and that is take a little mouthpiece out of your mouth, roll your lower lip in further. There are three things that you can do. Put more lip inside, bunch it more with ooh, which thickens it, or just take less mouthpiece. And the easiest one is less mouthpiece. And if you do that, you'll fix that problem so that they can fill it up. And I still give middle school clinics to a middle school near Charlotte every year. And the sixth graders, boy, I'm telling you, they can really make noise. And I play the old curmudgeon, and I duck and cover and ask them if they're angry with me for some reason, and why are they shouting all the time? And they laugh, and then they start to listen themselves a little bit. And then when we pull them back, they have me back. I've been back every year in the same middle schools for almost 20 years in a row, and I'm always happy to do that because I want to help as much as I can. Um, but it's an easy fix. Just take less mouthpiece. That is the most simple fix in the world. And it's far better than hiding from the problem or trying to hide the problem. Let me go down here. All right. Practice suggestions. I'm, they don't know what you don't tell them. And if you don't tell them they should practice every day, most of them won't figure that out. I've learned in my private students, and I still maintain a pretty large private studio of high school and younger students. One of my freshmen this year, really dynamite player. started with me in 8th grade along with his twin sister, and their father studied with me when I was up at Furman a very long time ago. They're my first second generation students. And you can get a saxophone student to sound pretty darn good in the first couple of months if you're just persistent with where they grip. It's just not, it's the easiest instrument in the world to play badly, but it's also a fairly easy fix. Yeah.
How far or on the down on the mouthpiece do you suggest?
Yeah. There are a couple of different techniques that people use. Um, and this would work the same for clarinet. Mouthpieces, all being a little different from each other, are going to have a different facing. How far that facing starts away from the tip will determine where you should put your mouth. Some people take a credit card, some people take a piece of paper. About where it stops is where you should put your lower lip as a starting point. So I put my lower lip right about here.
Mm-hmm.
But then the bottom line is, how does it sound? And if it sounds raunchy and brassy and reedy or squeaky, then you just take a little less. Or bunch your lip a little harder. But they're going to forget to bunch the lip. And if they get to the right spot, and the easiest way to get that consistent, you can't put anything on the reed because you'll ruin the vibrations, but you can put, and I do this, I keep electrical tape in my briefcase, and I'll cut 2 strips of electrical tape and put them right across here so that they can slide their teeth up. When they feel the bump of that tape, that's where they should be. And that'll usually give them the right spot on the bottom. It's a very simple way to get them consistent. The electrical tape will stay on there for a week or 2, which is usually all they need if they're consistent, because at that point, then they'll grip the mouthpiece in a similar way from that point on. If they're out too far, and one thing you'll see, and clarinet's different. Clarinet, the angle, let me get a right angle here. Your angle is more 45 degrees on clarinet. A little top and a little more bottom, because the reed's really small and you're going to end up pinching the reed if you bunch your lip too much on clarinet. On saxophone, even the smaller ones, that's not as big an issue. On saxophone, you want more of a right angle. If you're out here too far, that's not a horrible sound, but you hear how the sound opened up and got warmer at the same time? That's because when I move my teeth forward, it pries my mouth open and my oral cavity opens up. Now, the same thing happens on clarinet, but the angle of the clarinet in your mouth is going to be a little different because of it being straight, and it's just it works better at a little bit of an angle. And you'll see some people, especially in the jazz world, hold that bell way up, and that allows them more topside and opens up the sound. Okay, but that's your basic parameter. It's really easy for a student to hide the angle that they're taking the saxophone or the clarinet. So I'll walk up to the right side and get a right angle and say, show me your upper teeth. Because if they lift the upper lip and leave everything in place, then I can see where both jaws are. When they go, I can't tell exactly what they're doing, but if they lift the upper lip, and I can see right where everything is and make small adjustments to help them if I don't like the sound. The key is to get them to like what you like, so that when they hear good sound, they understand that it's good sound and that's what they go after. And then their ears will be their guide from that point. Okay. I and it's different when you're in a large group, like in your band, than privately. But with private lessons, and I think even in a band situation, try to get the students to put a regimen together in their practicing. It'll keep them on their instrument longer, no matter what it is. I have them start with tone builders and then go to some scale work and then go to some etude work and then some music. If they have to put this book down and open up the next one and then do the next thing and have at least those 4 events to get through, they're going to practice a little bit longer. It might be from 5 minutes to 10, it might be from 10 to 20, or from 30 to an hour, but if they have those different goals and always in that order, the Premack principle is one of my lifelong addictions, and I know it because in my ed psych class, I didn't know it on the exam, so of course now I remember it 40 years later. But the Premack principle states that if you make a desired behavior contingent upon the completion of an undesired behavior, the students will do more of the undesired and less of the desired. For instance, you can go to recess if you come to school with your math homework done. They'll go to recess less because some days it just won't happen, but they'll do more math homework. So for me, the way I structure things is we get the music last, the tone builders, the scales, the technical stuff first. And a good student's going to be through all of that in the first 20 to 25 minutes of an hour lesson. And then they get 35, 40 minutes of their solo stuff, which is far more fun for me too. Um, but I don't flinch on that. If they're not done with their scale, we'll do the scale and I'll show them how to practice it in their lesson. If it takes the whole hour, it takes the whole hour, and we hope it doesn't happen again. In your band practicing schedules, you can put some regimen at the beginning, and once we get this established, I think it's a lot like our football team, we hope, are all somewhere working out and keeping their muscles stronger, making them stronger, and their stamina and all of the things. Why? Because we're going to go out at the 50-yard line and bench press and see who can bench press the most and they win the game? No. But being stronger makes it more likely that they can be successful at their job on the field. That's where the scale work and the technique work comes in. It is your weightlifting in the off season, except that it goes on all season long, just like it does in sports now too. But the more my students who are the most advanced in that technical sense play the best music, because they don't have to think about the technique. They can focus solely on making music, because all of this stuff takes care of itself, and it's just not a problem. If you're thinking about it to hold things together, you're not playing great music because you're distracted. So that's my philosophy on that, and I stick with it. It works for me. Um, and I don't tell the students it's called the Premack principle. Who cares? All they know is we'll get to the etude when the scale work's done, and we'll get to the music when the etude's done. Um, and if you can figure out what you want to do with your band program and start with the fundamental things, intonation exercises, tone, scale work, stuff like that as a group, and then build to the stuff that they want to do and that you want to do. Uh, but for me, I don't eat dessert at the beginning of the meal. Okay. So that's my method with practicing. I always give them a plan, and then I spend a lot of time showing them how to practice, because how will they know if I don't teach? Um, and I will have students practice in their lessons for me. And at the beginning, I'll direct it. And then as we get deeper into the lessons, then I want to see what they're thinking. And if they're not reading my mind as to what they should do next, then we talk about it and why not, and what they should be looking for before they move on, and the way to go about it. But I tell my students to practice like they eat. So I'm hoping to have a steak for dinner tonight, and it's 12 ounces. I'm going to shove that whole thing in my mouth and hope for the best. No, but that's how the students tend to practice, right? They read through the whole thing and go, huh, all right, maybe read through it again. Now I've practiced it. No, take a bite-sized chunk, chew it up, but good. Take the one beside it, and then the next one, and then the next one, till they work their way around the whole way through the piece. And they think about it. I mean, most of us eat um, meat from time to time, although every now and then I have students like, yeah, no, I don't eat that stuff. But the bottom line, they understand. You can't just shove the whole whatever it is in your mouth and hope for the best. It's called biting off more than you can chew. And when we practice, we have to think in the same terms. Take a small chunk, really make it understood carefully, chew it up, but good, digest it, put it away, get to the next one. The difference comes in, we have to link those little bites together when we're practicing. Um, so I always I spend a lot of time in my private lessons, I don't know. The middle school band was 40 years ago. So I remember a lot of things. I remember a couple of names, you know, the two really great kids, the Bowmans and David Mann, who I hope he's doing okay. Anyway, but he was a pill for me. Anyway, none of you are named David Mann, I hope. Is there any? No? Okay, good. Whew. I shouldn't have said the name. Um, when it comes to saxophone fingerings, there are a couple of things that I want everybody to know. And I'm not as adept with what the beginning texts say on flute and clarinet, but for saxophone, a lot of the textbooks talk about 1-1 as an option for B flat. That's because those textbooks were written in the 30s. Okay. The manufacturers have sacrificed that fingering to other things since the 30s, really since about the 60s. Those books haven't been rewritten. Band directors, for no bad reasons, teach that fingering because it's right there. It's the one that's in the book. Please don't teach that fingering. It's awful. It's terribly flat and out of tune. Bis, where you cover the first big button and the second one with one finger, and you're there all the time. It's like double thumb B flat on flute. And if you have your finger on the bis, the only note you can't play is B natural. So if you have chromatic scale, you don't want to be using bis. That's the side. But if you teach those two fingerings, teach side first, because once the students figure out bis, they're never going to want to use side again, and they do need to in some places. But please throw away the 1-on-1 fingering. It's a terrible fingering on any modern saxophone. Side C, I don't use much. Trills only. I only use it for trills. It's also very flat. Even on my Selmer Paris, it's a flat note. It's not as good. It comes off your body because the hole's back on this side of the horn. If you use the front C, you'll be fine. If you're going back and forth multiple times or trilling, then side C can be handy. But if it's not, if it's just once going through, like chromatic scale, I see a lot of students come with side C on the chromatic scale. It's not a better choice. The front is better. So posture, and this is the same for everybody. They want to have nice little bit of curve in the back of the spine because it raises the sternum. So I don't know if I can get here. Yeah, the sternum. As I arch my back, that finger's pushed forward a lot. Well, that's because the rib cage is expanded, the sternum is pushed forward, and everything behind that is room for my lungs. If you hunch, then that collapses in and you don't have much room to breathe. So that's the basic thing for basic posture. On the saxophone, you want the top thumb at a 45-degree angle because then the fingers are going parallel to the floor. And you want the bottom thumb barely in the hook. One of the things you'll see a lot, let me move this so I can actually see me too, is you'll see thumbs sticking in this side of the saxophone. You don't want to see that. It should just barely be in the hook. And the key, and it's the same for clarinet, and the same for flute, or really any instrument, is you want your hands to come straight off the arm bone. The back of your hand should be straight off the arm bone. If it's pulled back, so if you take your hands straight forward, let your fingers curve and wiggle. Everybody do that, please. Okay, if you wiggle, now pull your wrists back like this and wiggle. Easier or more difficult? Way more difficult. Forward, same thing. So where your fingers are going to be the most facile is when your arm comes straight off, your hand comes straight off the arm, not at some angle. Okay, so what that means on the saxophone is this lower thumb is going to barely be in the hook. And what I'll do is I'll take a pencil once they're set up and I'll lay it here and say, I want you to touch the pencil with your wrist. Okay, then what you're going to get is this. They pull the elbow up and they still have the problem. So you have to work with some students a little bit, but if the hands come straight off the arms, their fingers are going to move more in a more relaxed manner, and then they're going to have better technique. Tension, as I like to tell my students all the time, tension is the root of all evil technically. It is the root of all evil. If I'm having trouble with the lick, and I played Um, what the heck show did I just play in Greenville? Aladdin. It was fun. What great fun. But I played 2 weeks of Aladdin. It's a lot of flute and a lot of clarinet and a little bit of saxophone. And when I was working on some clarinet licks and having trouble, I always think, dummy. And I look for the tension and I find it and I get rid of it and then it cleans up. Tension is going to cause all of the technical problems that they have. If they're having trouble with anything in your band music or their music at any level, look for the tension as the cause. You'll see shoulders go up and down, both any instrument really, but with the left hand higher on the clarinet and saxophone, that left shoulder tends to go up. And that,
Doc,
yes,
so between the legs or on the side?
on the side, please. And I'll tell you why. And I now practice between the legs because this stupid office chair has arms, and I can't do that without getting really whacked out. And I'm too lazy to go to the kitchen and get one that doesn't have arms. But for a little kid, if they're not exactly the right height, they're doing this, and they got all kinds of embouchure and posture problems because they got to reach the saxophone because they'll lay it on the chair. Or if they're really tall and they reach down for it, it has another problem. If you put it on the side, and there are a couple other reasons too, I'll get into in a second. If you put it on the side and their angle is here, you push the right hand front, the back of the horn should be halfway between the hip and the knee. That's easier to spot, it's easier to fix. And the other thing is the modern saxophone, because some textbooks say either's fine, and I can make either work, but the old saxophones had the B key here. And that's how you can tell the age of a lot of the instruments you'll see. If the B key's on this side, it's a vintage horn from the 30s. Okay. Well, so if you put it on the side, your clothes are blocking that hole. If you put it in the middle, excuse me, your clothes are blocking the E flat and the C and the B, C sharp key. So either way, you're blocking horns. On the modern horn, if you put it on the side, you block nothing. There's nothing over here. And so all the holes open out away from your body, and you're going to get better response in the low register. So it can lead to posture problems, but it also, I mean, and I got to tell you, when I'm wearing a sport coat to play, every now and then, a flap of that jacket gets stuck, and then a pad gets, I don't know how it gets in there so fast. You open a side F sharp key, and all of a sudden you can't play anything in the low register because your button is stuck in between. And this can happen too. It's just for posture, I like it far better on the side. Okay. Um, Clarinet, obviously, and I'll prop the clarinet on my knee and take the pressure off my thumb. Can't hear it. It's right here on my leg. You can hold it. I don't have any problem with it. It just takes the pressure off my thumb, and then my thumb doesn't get sore. With flute, the thing you're going to see is this thumb coming way under, and they'll just corral it here. But then these fingers are at a terribly awkward angle, and you see my hand position here. Now my hand is coming straight off my arm like I want it. Okay. So it's really all about the wrists, but it keys on the two thumbs on all of the instruments. It really does. So I pay attention to how their thumbs look, and then as a secondary thing, whether the hand's coming off the arm correctly. Okay.
Gotcha.
So for tone builders, wind speed is your big thing, and I do one. I call it. I tend to say it's like voodoo without the animal sacrifice. It's magic. And I do this all over the world, and it's always shocking how much difference it makes. And what I do is on a saxophone, and this would work on clarinet, doesn't work on flute. Ever had somebody say, you got to support better, you got to support better, support better, support better? I don't know what that means. in a physical sense. I mean, intellectually, I understand the word, but in a physical sense, I don't know what to do to support better. Blow louder? Okay, but it's a soft spot. How do I support better at pianissimo? And yet you can. And so what I do is I take, and my students all know to hate this exercise. I heard one of them on Facebook last week called it spinach for the saxophone playing. It's, you know, it's good for you, but you don't like it. And if can you see that the reed is way off center?
Yeah.
If it's far enough that I can barely make a sound, but can make a sound, then it's correct. So if they can hold it for more than a four note, 4 beat whole note, it's not bad enough yet. Okay, it should be horrible.
Right.
Okay, then they go back to normal with the reed placement. That's better support than I was giving you 5 minutes ago.
Right.
Why? I don't know, except for it's like, okay, so if they ever play baseball again, when the guy who's on the on deck circle stands there and watches, right? Now, usually they put something heavy on the end of the bat, swing it a couple times, and right before they walk out to hit, take the weight off and go out. Why? Because the bat just feels so light by comparison after that. Do they do it once at the beginning of the season and then it's good for 162 games? They do it between every at bat. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask my students to do this between every event of their practicing. So do a warm up scale, do that, do your warm up again. Play your scale work, do it again. Play your etude, do it again. Play your solo, do it between every movement of your solo or everything that you do. Now, not every instrument can make the reed crooked. The flute that would have trouble with that. Clarinet, it works just fine. Okay. But there's another one, which is you hook up and you get ready to play and put your fingers, your hand over your mouth vertically. Small aperture here and take a very resistant inhale. Because that very resistant inhale will force a more resistant push or better support in your push. Now it's a lot more temporary than the crooked reed. So I use the crooked reed a lot. If I were teaching flute, I would use this a lot. Clarinet and saxophone, it would work. Double reeds, it's not going to work. But this does. It just doesn't have as long a lasting power because you're not doing it for as long. Okay. But when I do this in clinics, I always do it with the student. They think it's so that they don't sound so bad all by themselves. It's so that when they're done, they don't sound better than me. And I mean that because my tone improves every time I do it still. So I've been playing the saxophone for almost 50 years. And it still improves me every time I do it. And whenever I have a bad reed day, I go back and I do it, and my reeds all magically improve. So I'm a firm believer in that. I got that from a guest artist, Jim Hulick, years ago, did it with one of my students. And I was like, I remember that from undergraduate school, hadn't used it in 30 years or 20 or whatever it was at the time. Now I will never forget it again because it is absolute magic. Okay. It's 2:45, so I want to get to some of your questions. I gave you a bunch of other information. If you have questions about that, please, pipe in and ask away. But some of the questions that were given to me, you want me to go?
Well, before we do that, Freeman McNair had a couple of questions he wanted to ask you. I think about something you said earlier, Doc.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I see. I wasn't looking at the chat. What is my take on adjusting a reed instrument to fit its right intonation? You have some reed instruments. Yeah. Okay. Here's the thing about intonation on a reed instrument. First of all, when you push the mouthpiece in, the upper register goes up exponentially more than the lower register goes up. So if your upper register's flat, push in, it'll go up more than the lower and you'll spread the octaves. If your upper register is wildly sharp, pull out and it'll come down more than the lower. That's on any instrument. Okay, flute, clarinet, saxophone, any other instrument. So as you,
Mr. Leaman,
yes,
what I was asking is that you know how you get maybe some newly packaged with reed instruments, and when you get them, you may think that they're in their right intonation. It actually is maybe a whole step lower than where it should be.
boy, if it's a
And
whole,
is there an easier way to regulate those instruments? That's where I was going.
yeah, if it's that far off, then I would send it back to the manufacturer and buy a different brand because it shouldn't be. There are every now and then you can buy an old French low pitch saxophone if you get something that's like 70 years old. But for the most part, and I did have a student got a Hungarian made saxophone, and there was no way he was ever going to play it in tune. It was that far off, and that was just a bad decision by his parents to his dad's Hungarian, and they bought from some no-name brand. That's one of the reasons I try to have them deal with Yamaha, Selmer, even the student line instruments. There's a little better technology that goes into that. But I don't know what to tell you. If they're a whole step off or a half step off, there's not much you can do, because if you pulled out or pushed in that much extra, again with that exponential upper register change, you'll be so far out of tune. I mean, I played a concert at my mother's place of employment years ago, and I thought the pianist hit the wrong note when I tuned because it was a half step below my tuning note. And I was like, no, I want a B flat. I don't want an A. He's like, I'm playing B flat. And I went around and I looked and he was hitting a black key, and I was like, uh-oh, we got trouble here. And what I did was I pulled out just a little bit and then I tugged like crazy for the next half hour, because if I had pulled out until it was comfortable, then the upper register would have been completely ruined.
Okay. And what about your what is your take? How as a beginning band director, as a band director for young beginning bands, especially with clarinet players, how were you able to? What was your steps on having your young clarinet players across the break?
Across the break, if you have them finger low D, 2 fingers, and then just hit the octave key on and off, it should go up to A. If it doesn't, then there's a problem here or in their wind speed. That's the hallmark place to check on clarinet. Overtones are a big place to check on any instrument. But on clarinet, if you just press the octave key, play low D. So if that doesn't happen, then you have to make some judgments. Are they not moving enough air? You could try that crooked reed exercise. Are they too loose or too tight with their embouchure? Is it choked off, or is it just really flabby sounding? And the strength of reed is going to have an impact on that. I am not a believer in starting really light on reeds. So on saxophone, I start my beginners on 2.5, and I let them struggle just a little bit till they get some musculature and can make that work, because once it works, then they have a better core sound, period. If you go down to 2s, and especially on clarinet, they'll get sounds, but then they develop bad habits with the musculature and it doesn't get stronger very quickly. It's like if you were trying to, go out for the football team and you spent your summer lifting 10 pounds as many times as you could. That's maybe not as good as if you went with something that would be a little more difficult at the beginning, but helps more in the long run. So I ask all of the students we put through that saxophone class to start them on 2.5s. If there's a real problem and they can't make it work, you could try a 2. Sometimes the mouthpiece factors into that. But on clarinet, I wouldn't go less than 2.5 either, because then they have to move enough air to get a sound that they're more likely to have a good setup here. On saxophone, I'll have them play mouthpiece alone and get a pitch. Clarinet, you can do it. That's not as big a thing with clarinet as it is with saxophone. On flute, to get to the upper register, starting like a low G, and and just have them do that on a G and F sharp and F and work down the instrument for a while and then up the instrument for a while, doing the first two overtones up and back. And that'll help them get the flexibility here for getting into those different registers. That's what I always do when I'm warming up for a show, is I just do a lot of overtones on flute, because I got big lips that weren't made for flute, but I can make them work. And so I have a teardrop and I have a big lower lip. So I have to figure out where that aperture is going to work for me on flute. But I can make it work. And it took me a while to figure it out. But where I lock it in is by playing those overtones so that I remember how to get to that upper register, because that's where the trouble's going to be if I have it.
We had a question from Christopher Cook.
Yes. What brands should we stay away from? Okay. It's easier to say what brands should we consider. I will tell you, Yamaha is like the bridesmaid on every instrument they make. They are number 2 on saxophone, number 2 on clarinet and flute and trumpet. They make a darn good product. And at the beginner level, they make, in a lot of ways, the best ones. Problem with Yamaha and saxophone is the metal's a little softer than Selmer metal, and so you'll end up at the repair shop a lot more often. Okay? If you're talking about buying for your school, I would always buy Selmer on a saxophone, because those horns get abused. Even at the college level, my horns are getting abused, and I talk to them, and they're good players, and they know how to care for their instrument, and it's still, well, it's not theirs, and they're just not quite as careful. The Yamaha is an easier blowing instrument on the saxophone by far, and a lot of students will prefer it. It's also a lot cheaper than the Selmer. There's something about the Selmer brass that's a little more rigid. So it's a long-term, short-term thing that you have to consider. I played Yamaha all through high school and into undergraduate school, and I've played Selmer since I switched over. I have no beef with Yamaha at all. And I play a buffet clarinet because that's the best clarinet out there, in my opinion, although Selmer and Yamaha make very good ones. I know in trumpet, the Yamaha is barking at the Bach, that, you know, is sort of the gold standard. If you want to consider any instrument, Yamaha's not a bad place to start. On saxophone, Cannonball gets a lot of push from local stores. I'm not a huge fan because the pitch, the intonation isn't as good, but it's not a bad horn, and you'll save a lot of money. Eastman is making a really good saxophone right now. You can remember it because it's like the Eastman School of Music, but has nothing to do with them. But I've played them, and they're dynamite, and they're really inexpensive compared to the Selmer line. That said, I'm a Selmer artist, and I'm a Selmer artist because I think they make the best saxophones out there. For clarinet, I'm not a buffet artist, and I'm not gonna be, because saxophone is my life. But buffet, LeBlanc, Yamaha, Selmer, all make really fine professional level instruments. The student line horns, Yamaha seems to have invested a little bit more than some companies, although I think the Selmer student line horns are now very good. They keep changing the name, so I can't even tell you what they're putting out right this second. I should have looked it up. But if you're buying for your school, buy the best you can get with the money you have available, and buy something that's likely to hold up over time. That would be my recommendation. Did I answer your question? To avoid, yeah, there are a lot of Asian brands that you've never heard of. I would avoid them, and they just keep cropping up. I mean, I can't even tell you what all of them are, but I mean, there are literally dozens and dozens of them, and it's all been in the last 10, 15 years. It's like mushrooms. All of a sudden, they're everywhere. Other questions?
Anyone else have a question? Yes, sir. Christopher.
Thank you for taking my question. Okay, so I tend to have a problem when with intonation, especially in flutes and saxophones. It'll be any piece where we're in a certain key, F sharp goes out of tune, concert A natural, concert D flat, and sometimes concert B natural, but that's hard for anybody. What are some techniques or some exercises that you can do with alto saxes, maybe flutes, to that?
I have all my saxophones
Because you can't pull out and you can't push in. You're in the middle of a passage and you got to use your ears.
Correct.
Oh.
I have all my students do what I call strength and flexibility exercises. And that is for saxophone, I'll start on high D where it's easy and have them bend it a half step down. And then and I have them bend everything a half step, because if you can bend it a half step, you can sure as heck bend it down in tune.
That's right.
And we, on saxophone, we take our flat notes, which is most of the lower register, except F sharp, by the way. The low F sharp tends to be a little bit high for most saxophones. So I don't tune to that. I tune to G, concert B flat on alto, because it's just a more steady note than the concert A. If they tune to the low F sharp, then I make them check the middle C sharp, because you can play that F sharp beautifully in tune and be so flat that you can't play anything. And flat can't be fixed while you're playing. You have to push in. But sharp you can fix almost indefinitely. So I push in till my flattest notes are in tune, and then I pull everything down to meet it. If I have the strength to move everything, and I can take that high D myself. Down to a G sharp.
Wow.
And if I can do that, so if Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, not my former student Dwayne Johnson, but if Dwayne Johnson and I have the same job, which is to carry 100-pound sacks of rice from here to there all day long, who do you think is going to wear out faster? Now, I can do that, but it's closer to my capacity than it is his, I would imagine. He appears to be way stronger than me. So I figure he's going to get a lot more of the bags across the room than I am before I peter out. So if my muscles here are strong enough to move all the way down to an A or a G, then just pull it down in tune. Doesn't tax me. If the most I can do is barely get it down to an in tune C sharp pulling for all I'm worth, I'm not going to get there very often, especially not in the flow of a piece. So I ask my students to do, and my teacher at Michigan, Don Cinta, was big on what we call voicing, because the area that I'm moving to make different vowel and consonant sounds for my voice is what we move to do that on saxophone or clarinet. Flute's a little different. Flute, you roll the head joint in and out. You roll it out, the pitch goes up. You roll it in, the pitch goes down. And then how you manipulate the aperture is going to have a big impact on it. But clarinet and saxophone, clarinet, you can cover holes and bring pitch around a little bit more because it's a thick-walled instrument and the holes are little. So all the air doesn't go out that first hole. On saxophone and flute, because they're metal, the walls of the instrument are much thinner and the holes are much bigger because they can, and the instrument still has core integrity. Then you can't cover much. There are a few things you can do to bring pitches down, but you're going to do it mostly in your oral cavity, because with that instrument sticking inside your mouth, your oral cavity is the missing part of the instrument. The clarinet and flute and clarinet and saxophone are designed to continue taper until they come to a closed point. Well, if they did, we couldn't blow into them, so we wouldn't have a usable instrument. So we cut it off. That's the truncation effect. We cut off part of the body of the instrument, put the mouthpiece reed in our oral cavity there in place of it. And then as you manipulate the size of your oral cavity, opening it up and making it higher in the back with your tongue, then you adjust the pitch that way. So I just have them pitch bend. And where they need it the most is where it's the most difficult to do. So, but I start them easy because success breeds, happiness and more success. And so if they can do it up on high D and they move it down, when they start getting to A and G sharp, it gets a little harder. And then when they get down to D, E, and E flat in the middle range, fourth line, fourth space, that's where it's really deadly if they don't adjust. but it's also where it's most difficult to move the pitch. But at that point, they've had some success and they know what to move. Okay. Other questions?
Any other questions? Awesome. All right. I guess you can go ahead with your questions, Doc.
Okay. There were some sent to me. One was, what are the greatest issues I see in young high school musicians? And I would have to say time commitment, discipline. They have so many things going on in life. You know, if you have, I mean, and there are different problems that are financial based. If they're too poor to afford lessons or have to go work to help, you know, the family, that's one aspect. But I found the other side of it is just as bad because, well, I had to cancel my saxophone lesson because my horseback riding was moved to that time. No, I've had that happen. Not lately, but so it's a matter of focus and time commitment. What I find is that the discipline is a really valuable thing for them in everything they do. And I feel like I teach self-discipline and problem-solving skills. Whether they go into music or not isn't so important. They can use the same skills that they get from learning an instrument in anything they do. And I get calls every now and then. I had a former student from USC call me last summer or the summer before, and he said, "Can we talk?" And I thought, "Oh, geez, what's going on?" And he said, "I just wanted you to know that my career is not in music anymore. I got out of that and I'm doing X, Y, and Z. But all those things you taught me are really valuable and I use them every day in my current job." And that really makes me feel good because I believe in that. And I don't, I shouldn't say I don't care if my students go into music or not, but that's not a litmus test for me.
Right.
If my high school, I have one of my best high school students is not going into music next year. And she's a brilliant student. I love teaching her, but what she got out of her lessons in the discipline and the problem solving is going to help her in the medical field that she's going to end up in. And, you know, a couple of my best freshmen, same thing, want to go into medicine. I think they smelled where money comes from, and it isn't always in music. That's another issue, though. And I tell students, and we had a student, clarinet student at USC, whose parents said, "I will pay for your college. We will pay for your college if you go into business, but if you go into music, you're on your own." And he just desperately wanted to be a music major, but he couldn't afford to pay for it all on his own and go into all of that debt, and his parents refused to help him at all. I think that's shameful.
Right.
First of all, you have to do what makes you happy, not what makes someone else happy. And that's what I tell my students. But I got to tell you, and what I'll tell a student like that who's questioning is, I can go home and play a gig tonight. Or, well, not tonight, but theoretically it could come back. So, you know, I played a 2-week run of Aladdin, and I played Charlie and the Chocolate Factory last fall, and I played Hello Dolly last spring, all at the Peace Center. And that's income that I can generate that the English teacher or the history teacher is going to have trouble doing. And I can teach private lessons if I need to supplement my income. And any music teacher can do that if they want to devote the time and whatnot. And I always have for a variety of reasons. I really enjoy it. But there are ways that the music teacher can actually make a substantially firmer income than the English teacher or the history teacher in the same place of employment. So the money isn't business world crazy good, as we all know, but it's a survivable, livable wage. People make do on a lot less than that, and there are jobs available. So I think sometimes I have to convince students, if they really love it, there are places for people who get good at it, but you have to be good at it. When I went into music ed, the statistics were my school, which was one of the best schools in central Pennsylvania for music ed, actually was the best, was placing 25 to 30% of their graduates in jobs. And my thought as a freshman going in was, yeah, well, I'll just make sure I'm in the top 25% easily. I can do that. I'll outstrip everybody else in my work habits. And if somebody's going to get hired, I'll assume it's me. If they weren't placing anybody, then that would have been scary. But for me, that was undaunting. One of the things I would encourage you to do is bring people in. I'll come to any of your schools. I promise you I will do. I have never turned down a clinic because somebody couldn't pay me. I have never turned down a clinic because it didn't pay enough. And I'm happy to come in and work with your band, with your saxophones, with your woodwinds, or whatever you want. But just bringing in people who have been successful at some level of success is really encouraging students who like it.
Yeah.
One of the questions was, how did I get, I think maybe that was somebody else. Oh yeah, that was somebody else. One of my our clarinet students is in Ohio, and her 10-year-old boy is playing the heck out of the saxophone. And she sent me 4 YouTube videos and said, what did you do? What got you hooked on the saxophone when you were this age? Well, I'll tell you, I got a good private teacher. I got a good experience, and the better I got, the more I liked it. And the more I liked it, the harder I worked. And the harder I worked, the better I got. And the better I got, you know, if you give a moose a muffin, it just keeps working. You know those books? I have daughters. You give a mouse a whatever, or a moose a muffin, and it comes right back to square one eventually. And that's how I teach. Internal motivation is far more valuable to a student than my external motivation of them, because my external motivation helps as long as I'm their teacher. It's been a while since I've had a teacher. If I was relying on Don Cinta for my motivation, I would have found something else to do 30 years ago. Because if they're not living on it for their own love, then it's a long career if you don't love what you're doing. So I would bring in guest artists as much as you can. Bring in people of different ilks. I mean, bring in a composer. What do you do with your day? I have a middle school student who was supposed to shadow me for the second time this spring. And of course, we got waylaid because we weren't meeting face to face by the time we had set it up. But get them out, get them doing things and exposed to various culturally significant events. Go to a concert in the park, go to Spoleto outdoors, I mean, there's stuff in most places that you can expose them to. Have them go on YouTube and find great recordings. I thought I listened to music in high school and undergraduate school, and then I got to grad school and I put it on overdrive, and it changed my life. Couple of really brilliant artists, not saxophonists, singers and violinists and pianists. And I was in Shanghai buying some piano CDs from the back of a bicycle. And my pianist who was with me goes, man, you got some really good stuff there. You got Schnabel and Brendel, and wow. I was like, yeah, I know who to look for on piano because I've spent a lot of time listening. So those are the kinds of things. The more you can give your students experiences outside just to come in and play the music in band rehearsal, the more they're going to see what's out there, and the more they're going to develop their own love. If they're relying on your love of the art, that's a good thing. It's a good motivator on a temporary basis. But for long term, if they want to go into music, they got to rely on their own, because they're going to be on their own for a long time. One of the questions you sent was, what are the most valuable lessons I learned from my teachers? My high school teacher: persistence and consistency. If I have a student who's not practicing regularly, I'll tell them, you know, my plan is to run the Boston Marathon next year, and here's my workout regimen. The night before, I'm going to run 27 miles, see how it goes, and then I'm going to get up on Saturday morning and run the marathon. And they look at me like I'm stupid, because that would be a stupid thing to do.
Right.
But that's how you practice. You wait till the night before, you try to practice a bunch and get it all squeezed in. It's not the same as if you go after it every day and keep the muscles in shape. Now, I would just physically die if that was my workout routine. I'd die long before the 27th mile on Friday night. But you're not going to die if you practice this way, but your musculature will atrophy in a way that it's just not going to be useful. And I try to bring it around the consistency. What my high school teacher taught me was, every day that I practiced, I improved, and every day I didn't, I slipped. So if you're slipping 3 days a week and improving for 4, where do you end up? Not very far.
Right.
And so if you're slipping for 2 days and practicing for 5, you're still not getting very far. If you're practicing for 7, then you're really on overdrive. And the momentum of that starts to take on its own drive, and it fuels me. It keeps me from taking a day off. I'll take a day off. I took some off here at the beginning of this because I had a huge spate of performances and I was shot, and then all of this COVID stuff hit, and I took a week, and I'm still digging out of that week. I have a friend who teaches clarinet at Arizona State who said he hadn't skipped a day of practice in over 15 years. I think that's nuts. My daughter, who's a professional oboist in Australia, takes mental health days far more than I do, but it works for her. But I can tell you my personal experiences for every day off, I have 2 back till I'm comfortable. So if I'm off for a week, it's 2 weeks back till I'm comfortable. If I'm off for a month, we don't want to talk about it. That's why I don't allow my students to not study during marching band, because I know what'll happen. They won't practice at all, and then they'll come back in mid-November and be February till we get caught up to where they were when they quit in July. Well, you're not going to get very far. So, marching band season lessons aren't the most productive, but they are productive, and we get some things done. And you learn to budget time. That's another thing. So I learned that consistency is the most crucial element to my long-term development, and I assume that's the same then for most people. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Listen, listen, listen. Sing. Have the kids sing. When I had my middle school job, I assumed my brass players would play more right notes if they sang because of hitting the right partials. What I was surprised to find was how many more right notes my woodwind players played after they sang. The fingers went to the right buttons at a far higher level of consistency, and they play more musically because we tend to sing naturally musically than we play when we have all of this stuff to worry about. So I have a non-disclosure agreement I make all my students sign when they listen to me sing. They're not allowed to tell anybody how it sounds. Then they feel safe. I have some issues with my singing voice, but I still know the value of it.
Right.
So I see somebody has a question. Let me go to the questions. Where are they? There they are. What's my practice regimen as a professional musician? It depends a little bit. I force myself to practice daily. When I have gigs coming up, like say if I were going to play for a group of band directors on a Tuesday afternoon at 2, it puts a little more point on the practice for me. But I had a tour of China scheduled for July. Oops, that ain't gonna happen. I had a concert at an art gallery in Greenville. I have a concerto by Augusta Reed Thomas in September, we hope. I don't know how that's going to look, but she's coming down for a week residency. I have gigs coming up all the time. So in January, I had the Navy Band Symposium with my new saxophone quartet, 3 of my former graduates. And then we played 4 concerts in 2 days in Columbia and Atlanta. And then I flew to Australia and played concerts. In fact, I had to play a concert the day I arrived after 28 hours of air travel. I had to play a concert that night, and then another one a couple days later. And then when I got back from that, I had the Aladdin show, and I'm busily practicing flute and clarinet. My life, as I tell my students, is a sequence of avoiding self-inflicted embarrassing moments, and by that I mean I practice. So I still practice. I like to practice 4 hours a day. I don't get that every day now. I do when I have gigs coming up. I'll try not to get less than 2 ever, but 3 is more normal for me now, and I do it all the time, and I find different things. I do a lot of commissioning of new music, which is really exhilarating because usually the composer will be at the premiere. I just premiered a piece in Arizona just before everything shut down. Composer flew out from New York to hear the premiere. That puts a point on it for me, and it motivates me because I sure don't want to embarrass the composer or make them upset. So I just put things in front of my nose all the time that force my hand. because I can tell you, if I didn't have a gig until next year at this time, I could not practice for a while and be very happy
Mhm.
sitting on the porch, and I do that some too, but um, I'm always looking for things that motivate that for me. I love to travel, and when I get to go around to this country or that country and meet new people and play concerts with them, or for them, it motivates me to practice. Hi, Whitney. I see you. Where's Whitney? Okay. I know I can be long-winded. Any other questions?
I had a question. I guess for those band programs who are in rural areas,
Yeah.
they may not be able to have access to private lessons on
Yeah.
their students. What do you recommend that they can do to somewhat supplement that need for those lessons?
Yeah, if there's any possibility. And the year I taught middle school, the gentleman who preceded me had set up a huge chamber music program in the school, and all of the kids in the band, in fact, he didn't even have a Christmas concert for the band. He had a Christmas concert for the chamber groups.
Wow.
And that puts a point on individual responsibility that they can hide from in a large group. That would help. Sometimes if you can get high school kids to come in and help the younger kids,
Yeah.
there are a lot of ways to do that. And I understand that that's just a difficult thing. I mean, when I did the governor's school auditions for years, when they had the summer program, I would see people requesting various levels of financial assistance, and these people don't own their own instrument and
Right.
have private lessons, and that's a handicap when you're going to a music major. And I don't have the answer for that, but I do think within your own programs you can try to get some, and it develops leadership in the older students. And if you want to learn a subject matter, try to teach it for a while. And I think it can help both ends of the spectrum if you can, generate some sort of system where the older students help the younger, some chamber music experience, even have older chamber groups coach younger ones and whatnot. They have to think about what they're doing then, and then when they go back in their own, I think they'll do it better. I think you can get some things like that. But I understand. I mean, I do.
I think we had a question from Adrian Wright.
Let me see. What are my suggested resources for middle high school saxophone students to help working on the areas I mentioned? Well, I sent out a bunch of information, and as I said once before, and I'll say again, I'm happy to come to anybody's school and work with your kids anytime. I don't do that as much as I'd like to, and it's because I'm not asked as often as I'd like to be asked. I'm not going to force myself on anybody, and I have more work than I need. But I
Well,
think it's
I
I
think
think it's
on
I
that
think it's
statement
really
alone,
important. I think it's really important, and I do it whenever I'm asked. I find a way to make it happen.
yeah.
Um, and I think most of my colleagues feel the same way, if not all of them. Um, I gave a clinic on recruiting to my colleagues a few years back, and since that point in time, one of them has spent jury finals week going out to 5, 6, 8 high schools all around the state every year. Um, and and he's putting me to shame at this point because he's doing more of that than I am at the high school level. But I'm always game to do that. I have an old high school friend who is a band director at Wilson High School in Pennsylvania, where Chad Henne went through. If you know that quarterback, he was, I think, with the Dolphins. Yeah. Anyway, every time I get anywhere near, I go give a clinic and a concert at his school for his kids, and partly because we're good friends, and partly because I think it's important. You'd be surprised how inexpensive. I don't like to pay to work.
Right.
If I can break even with my costs of getting to a gig, so if I go to China, that's a little different than if I drive 25 or 125 miles. But that's sort of my gold standard is I'm too old to pay to do work, but I will do work for the good of the order, and the order is any student, anybody, and what we do I think is really important, and I think if we do it well, the kids who don't go into music as a career, but become doctors and lawyers and bankers and engineers and school teachers of other subject matters, maybe they'll come to the concerts. Maybe they won't spend $5,000 a year to go to 7 football games, but they'll spend $200 to go to 7 orchestra concerts.
Right.
Can you imagine if the local symphony charged what we charge for our football tickets to go to a concert? Nobody would go. I sure wouldn't go. But I don't pay to go to the football games either. Every now and then I'll sneak in with the band just to see how they're doing. But, you know, I would like to think that over time we can turn priorities a little bit by doing a good job and giving a great experience in the arts to our students, so that whatever they do in their life as a career, they value. My brother goes to more concerts than I do. He's a computer engineer or programmer, and he has season tickets to the Cleveland Orchestra because as a computer programmer, he can afford that. So there's just a whole lot of stuff that we can do. The resources, YouTube is a great thing, but they have to know what they're looking for. All of my recordings are on iTunes, and so are a whole lot of other people. There's a resource that we didn't have when we were young. If you're in my age bracket, you know, you buy 1 or 2 albums and you listen to them 100 times each. Now kids can go out. I went out, I did a listening class with my saxophone students instead of an in-person studio class, and we listened to singers, and every recording I wanted was there. Everybody I wanted to hear was there. So, you know, I those resources are easy and free now. You can get all over the place with Spotify and whatnot. You have to be careful because everybody's out there, and you are what you eat. If you listen to Kenny G, you're going to play sharp with a reedy sound and a wacky vibrato. So, did I say that out loud, or I can't remember? They listen to Kenny G in China, let me tell you, and they know all about playing sharp. Kenny G is apparently a really good human being, and I shouldn't talk about his playing. He makes enough money to buy and sell me every day he wakes up alive.
Oh yeah, you and me both.
I know. Probably all of us combined, really, but you know, good for him. He figured out what sells, and Kool-Aid sells a lot more volume than fine wine, and that's okay.
That's right.
So I'm happy with what I'm doing, and I'm, you know, I tell my wife I resist being really famous for her good, because it would be a lot of pressure on her. Yeah, she laughs too. I don't get that. Yeah, no. So, you know, the resources are actually so available now, and there's a lot of thought that saxophone playing and clarinet playing and all these instrument schools of thought are getting a lot more unified now, because everybody is listening to everybody, because it's free, easy, and accessible, and it's right there. So, but the more they listen, the better they're going to get. Nothing you can do or I can do in a verbal way is going to be as impactful as listening to a great recording, even if it's not what you're working on.
All right, Doc. Man, I really appreciate it, man.
It's my pleasure, truly. And it's great to see the familiar place. I saw Linard Jr. lurking at some point. I see Whitney lurking. Great to see you guys, sort of. So, anyway.
It's really been awesome. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this. And we're trying to take advantage of this pandemic and get people of your ilk on during this time.
Who knows what band is going to look like next year? That's right. My worry. I'm thinking maybe plexiglass all around everybody, but of course that's not cheap either.
Right.
My wife wants me to ask the school to get a big plexiglass screen for between me and the students, because you know we move a lot of droplets of air when we play a wind instrument.
Yep.
So we'll see. Hopefully we'll get this under control.
I hope so, man, because I don't know what things are going to look like.
Yeah.
Especially for a public school, high school band. You know?
Yeah, my youngest daughter just finished, or is about to finish, her first year teaching high school English. What an unusual year to start. But,
I know. All right.
Well,
wow. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Appreciate you, Cliff. We'll talk. And,
thank you.
Great job, man. Just enjoyed it. I'm quite sure the band directors feel the same.
It's my pleasure. And again, anything I can do to help any of you, just ask. If you don't have my information, you should have my email at least from this, right?
I sent all the information to Ernest, and any band director that wants it, Ernest will send it to him.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. All right. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Before we let you go, Doc, can everyone unmute their microphones? Just entertain me for a second. We're going to give Dr. Leaman a rousing round of applause for.
Thank you, Dr. Leaman.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Doc,
Thank you all.
I know you said you don't do clinics for free, but all we have is applause today.
I didn't say that. I didn't say I don't do clinics for free. I said I don't pay to work.
Right. That's right.
There's a difference. I do clinics for free. And back in the good old days when industry was working, I can, with 2 months advance notice, I can get Selmer and Daddario both to pitch in, and Daddario will send frequently boxes and boxes of reeds and things to hand out. So it can be free or cheap to any school, and I don't have to pay to go do it. I don't know where Daddario, I know they furloughed half of their workforce, but I assume this will all come back when everything starts to come back. So, but money has never been an issue for me giving a clinic.
Oh, that's awesome.
All right.
South Carolina, Georgia band directors on the call. So.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.